Good morning, everyone. So it's 11 o'clock. We are here for the webinar. It's your digital sovereignty from Enginsight. As I know there will still be people coming, seeing the participant list, do allow me to give them another 3 minutes. So we will be back at 11:03. If you want to grab a cup of coffee or a glass of water, then now is a perfect timing for it. So see you in 2 minutes now. All right, it's 11:03, so let's start. So first of all, welcome everyone. This is the second part of our two webinar series. Today we have the technical part. We had last week sales, commercial-oriented session. If you are also interested in that, do drop me an email. I will show we will show our emails later on the slide, or drop me a short message on LinkedIn, and I will provide you a link to the video for the commercial session. Let's do some housekeeping. We have disabled the video and audio functions. There is still the Q&A functionality enabled in a moderator mode, meaning we can read what you ask, but that is not necessarily open, or not necessarily, that is not open to the public. So if you have a question, do me a favor, just punch it in, and then I will let it go and when Stefan kind of has his technical session, and the other way around when I'm talking. So what's up for today? I think we have done the housekeeping. In the end, we will also send an email with the PDFs of the session and with a link to the video. So if you want to check it again, or if you want to share it with someone else, go ahead. You will get the information. As today here in Germany, respectively, tomorrow is Easter, we will send the information early next week after the Easter days. We will have a very quick kind of introduction generally into Enginsight that will be done by me, and then we change into the more technical part, discussing shortly about the infrastructure and presenting 4 use cases today, which Stefan will lead through in a combination of preparational slideware and then showing it in the UI. Once again, if you have questions in between, do me a favor, go ahead. And then we close the session in the end. Maybe shortly before we go on, I am Thomas. I'm together with on the commercial side with my colleague Lutz, who was also part in the first session, and with Stefan and his teams from the pre-sales side, running the internationalization and with Enginsight. But so much to me. And Stefan, maybe a few words to you.
Yeah, my name is Stefan, presets engineer. I worked in the past for vendors, firewall vendors or network vendors, and I'm more from the network area, but I like the solution of Enginsight, and I worked over 2 years now for Enginsight.
Okay, excellent. So let's go. As I said, we had a commercial or a previous session before. So let me do one quick wrap up, so to say, from that and say what I presented there was the components as well of the Enginsight solution. So we have, let's say, 5 components of which Enginsight consists. The one is the watchdog, which is an IT monitoring inventory tool. We have the Observer, which is a website/web application scanning tool. We have the Hector, which is an automated pen testing tool. We have the Pulsar agent that resides on client and servers, which is then kind of security client residing on the respective asset. And we have a SIEM component. And these 5 together kind of bundle up to the Enginsight platform. Today, we will talk about the first 4. We will not have time enough for touching the SIEM solution. If you are interested in that after the session today, do me a favor, drop me a note either here in the Q&A session or via LinkedIn, and then we will set up a separate SIEM session in the coming, let's say, 2 to 4 weeks. Now, the entry into the platform, now maybe go one back. The entry into the platform, that is the dashboard, as with many other solutions. And obviously highlighting here, the solution is multi-tenant capable. So if you are from with a reseller background or with a service provider background, then yes, you can have multiple organization within your service setup, which then sums up further down. It says here in the asset operations center, which means that obviously you see all asset of all clients that are running within your service environment, so that you can streamline, let's say, services, respectively processes within your service across all IT itinerary that runs into that service. Right. Otherwise, it gives an entry into all sorts of security and risk-related top information across the platform that you're working on. To most of these, we will shortly say something within the session. And obviously, if you run individual services, you can also build individual dashboards. We will not touch the dashboard topic really in today's sessions. But just have in mind that if you have specific service offerings where you need specific dashboard and information aggregated to, then these can be created. Now, the one were the components, and the other one is the process idea with which we work in the system. Right, and we talk about these 5 processes in general, and then there's a underlying overall process, which I will mention also. But from the individual steps, we talk about an identification phase, an attack phase, a detect phase, a react phase, and an improvement phase. Right? In this identify or identification step, it's all about understanding what is in your network. Right? And that is for creating an inventory. We use the watchdog for it, and if you also include a software inventory, we also use the Pulsar agent for it. That is very often the base and relevant also when you look into the direction of compliance, right? So building an inventory, the one and the other hard in software is also the base information or the base requirement if you go into certification process like the ISO 27001, like TSAX, or also if you start doing risk evaluations, then you will also need to know what's there. Once you have established that status, right, then from a risk and security management point of view, you want to establish the is status. So what's my security / my vulnerability status? And that's where we use the Hector with the automated pen testing and vulnerability scanning. Right, so you can use the Hector, but I know that Stefan will also mention it. You can use it either from the outside or, even more or similar important from the inside to understand once someone might be in, or if some attack is executed from the inside, what everything could be done from, respective area. From the process point of view, once you have established your security status, then you move into the security and the defensive measures, right? So then you want to understand on an ongoing basis, what's happening in my environment, and that's a detect phase, right? I'm not going to read all the highlighted items here, with vulnerability management and so on and so on. But basically, in the detection phase, we use a Pulsar agent. We use partly again the watchdog, understanding, maybe there is a new hardware somewhere that has not been there before. Is that wanted or is that not wanted? Is that allowed or not allowed? Should happen something with that information. And we use the observer for this whole website, web security. It says here about website, web application monitoring. Now, from a process idea, once you have detected something, you obviously want to react to it. And there's, really effective alarming capabilities in the platform. Stefan will also touch these. And obviously, in the ideal case, you also want to have automated reactions on the detection just for the speed of the topic, right? So there are the options of building automated actions based on what we detect. And obviously, if you run an IDS, you also want to complement that with an IPS. Seen something, reacted on something, then the next step is actually get permanent improvements. Right, that will be logically the next step, and then we are into patching in the topic of patching, into configuration management, meaning into hardening of systems, and we are also into a topic of microsegmentation, understanding this is a client-based solution, so this is a microsegmentation based on client residing on IT assets, complementing a network-based microsegmentation. Now, the underlying process that happens all the time is an analyze process, right? Each of the individual steps produces a lot of information, and these are then aggregated, correlated, and analyzed to be able then, out of the respective steps, kind of provision and also prepare the next steps. So that would be the underlying process. Now, I think in the light of yesterday's events, I want to also shortly touch this topic of CVEs. I'm not going to roll up the whole case of what the CISA, MITRE, NIST, let's say, chain is, and the threat that has been for a few hours in the market that the NIST and the CVE database, let's say, or the maintenance and the further development of the database gets halted. I want to bring this up here. Obviously, we have some base explanation about CVE and what scoring system we use. We need to understand that the Enginsight solution uses its own CVE database, which contains different or information from different sources, right? One of it is the NIST. Other sources are operating system manufacturers. Others are authorized data publishers, CVE numbering authorities. So we created our own database with the idea of having multiple sources to be, in today's view, more independent, but also to complement the respective sources. I like to bring one quick example, kind of keeping the time in mind. But we all know the German software vendor SAP, and SAP runs on Windows operating system on SUSE and Red Hat. And depending on what kind of, let's say, SAP solution and subscription plan you have different maintenance periods, windows, however you want to call it, right? Depending on what the subscription length you have. Now, part of these distributions are particular to SAP, right? And if SAP fixes something within their, let's say, Red Hat XYZ distribution, that does not necessarily mean that that is also fixed in other non-SAP distributions. So it is relevant to understand what kind of distribution you have and what is the patching level. And that is why we are also crawling, besides kind of in this database, we're also crawling separate OS vendor databases to complement this. And Stefan will also, I think, here and there mention and refer to that vulnerability scanning part. And maybe in addition, one additional, let's say, note on the CVSS, so on the criticality of the severity of the found CVE, right? That is one standard measure that you see in the market. So how severe is a vulnerability that is found, and that is complemented also in the Enginsight platform with the EPSS score. So the probability on how that vulnerability can be exploited. With some you have a vulnerability that you find and that has a high severity, but the likelihood that it's exploited is literally zero, right? So for you, in an administrative point of view, it is relevant to understand, okay, where do I need to look at? Is that one that has a high vulnerability score, or is it also combining with what is actually probable to be exploited, right? And that will guide you in where to turn first. From a partner point of view or from a service provider point of view, you obviously want to do these things first that harm your customer the most. All right, but so much for the CVE database and kind of bring that in the light of current developments. And I think with that, Stefan, it's all up to you talking about architecture and solution.
Okay, perfect. So let's first talk about the architecture, because it's very easy to install his own Enginsight instance, the on-prem. For the basic features today, we need only for maybe 500 assets. So 500 asset means we have 500 agents outside. For 500 assets, we need 2 servers for the or virtual machines for the Enginsight instance. We need only 1 server with application services. So that means on the bottom in the box, we see the service API UI component. And these are microservices. We have a lot of more, like an updater that pulls every hour new updates, IDS patterns, or CVE information, or a reporter that generate that match the software inventory to the CVE database, and so on. This runs these services run on the application server for us. That is the first virtual machine, and the second virtual machine is the database. That's a small instant, and we use MongoDB for the database service. To set up for 500, the setup for 500 users or agents need only per instance for CPUs 8 GB of RAM and 200 GB of hard disk for the application server, and for CPUs 4 GB RAM and 100 GB of hard disk for the database server. So that means when we have installed the instance, we can add a lot of sensors and push our agent to the instance, but we must access the API. The API runs normally on HTTPS, and the sensors, the observer, actor, watchdog, or the agent, Pulsar agent, open a web socket to the API, and then ask every time if the API has new jobs for the service. So that means that we can install internally or external services like, or sensors like observer for the website scanning, or actor for pen testing, or watchdog for inventory or monitoring task. And the agent runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac systems. Yes. So this is the architecture. This is very easy, but let's go to the use cases. The first use case is inventory. Thomas explained why we need inventory, and what are the options. So in this case, or in this use case, we use both. We use the watchdog for IP inventory and the Pulsar agent for the software inventory. And now we are in the security process in the identify, detect part. So first, let's talk about the watchdog. The watchdog is a small sensor that runs on Linux machines, and the watchdog try to detect the IPs with ping or port requests. So port request means we have a lot of port for the identify process that we check if when we ping it, we see the reply with the MAC address. We know which vendor it is. Maybe we know that is a printer and so on. And when we verify it with a port scan, we try to open, in the printer case, we try to connect via port 9900. That's the raw printer port, for example, and then we test it is really a printer. We use a lot of ports, so that means when you have different networks and only one actor, you must install, you must configure the firewall with different routes for the different networks. And the second part, because when a hacker is in the network, I think he will not reply or response to a ping request or port request. He will drop the package. But he must check which device is in the network. And for this, he generates automatically ARP requests. So it's also possible to track that devices via sniffing function like ARP requests in the watchdog. For this, we need the promiscuous mode. Yes. So I will show you this directly on the platform. It's easier to know what's up. So this is the platform, and on the left side we have the main menu, the sub menu for each section, and now we are in the discovery part. The discovery part means you can install a watchdog, you can check if the watchdog is up to date, and you can configure the watchdog. Because when you install a watchdog, you must configure for permanent monitoring. So every 20 minutes, for example, we check if the IP is online or is a new member in the network. We don't get an ARP request. Also, the cleanup process is possible, but when you will add some sniffing function, we need the promiscuous mode. And we configure the promiscuous mode on the network adapter top, and we can enable it here. For example, this actor has 4 interfaces, and we enabled it for 3 for the interfaces. This is an option.
Stefan, just for the naming, the watchdog, not the Hector. Not that someone gets confused.
Sorry. The watchdog. Yes. Correct. When we run the watchdog in the networks, we get an inventory list, and the inventory list means we know which operation system is it. So this means we know it's Windows, it's Linux, or something else. When we have more information, we will add it there. For example, when the Windows host has a remote desktop connection online enabled, sometimes we get some operation system information from this request, and then we will add it to the information here. But you can rename the host, add a description. You can add tags for better sorting, and you can add categories. After this, you can configure the technical and specialist manager for this host. For example, here our CEO Mario is a specialist, and we can add location information. These information are important for an ISO, for example, because we need this information. So this is the first part of the inventory. The second part is the Pulsar agent with the software inventor. And when you install the agent, it's also easy. You can get the installed string via button here on the top. Then you must choose the correct operation system, for example, Windows, and you see we support every Windows system from 2008 or 7 up, and we have all functionality in the cloud on the same system. So you install it, and then the agent will fetch some monitoring information. Why monitoring information? Because we need this information, for example, or inventory asset information. For example, we know the baseboard, motherboard vendor, and so on, the serial number, the UID, or something else. We know every software that has installed on the systems, or the services that in the auto start, or the services that run the open connections. So these are inventory and monitoring information. You can export this information and get a perfect overview of the inventory. But we need more these information for security relevant tasks, like when we know that the software app resolver is installed with this version here, we know the vulnerabilities of the service. For example, we know now on this host we have a lot of findings, but when we check with our recommendations, that all problems comes from, or all findings comes from the Windows updates. And so it's easy to install all Windows updates. For example, here, I can do this. Zack, it's installed. So the inventory part is perfectly, and we need it for more information. This is use case 1. The second use case, wait, I need my presentation. The second use case is, for example, the attack and defense part. The attack part, we know we need the Hector. For the defense part, we need the Pulsar agent. And you see my Windows 10 host. I installed this host this week. I enabled remote desktop for two users. One is Steffen, and the other was the administrator. And then I scan the host with the Hector first. So that means the Hector works similar to the watchdog because they need also information from the network. If you scan the network with the watchdog, you can give this information to the Hector. Then we skipped the first task. Then we start to the second task, the service discovery. This means that we check which service is online in the network. Is an HTTP service online or database service or something else? When we connect to the database service, in the most cases, we get an information or better example, Debian server with SSH server enabled. And when we connect to the SSH server via TCP Connect, the SSH server gives us back the version, the major version of the SSH daemon. And then we know that the SSHD in version 9.2 is on the systems. But the servers don't tell us that's the patch version 10 or something else. So we see maybe a CVE false positive because the service told us it's only 9.2 as version, and we know that this CVE is fixed in 9.2.10, for example. And then we have a false positive in the network. This is a good false positive because the hacker must check it also. So the hacker need more time, and that is important. So the next step is not only service brute forcing. This is an example. We try a lot of other things like MDNS requests or SNMP requests and service brute forcing or with our own password list, some checks. So, and the last step, when we see here's the CVE, we can connect to the service via brute forcing. We try some exploits, payloads. And the payloads are exploits, but the last change command, we change it in the source code with a sleep command. So we try, the Hector will don't change anything in the network. We show only this issue or this finding is in the network. Why? Our mission is that we can run many scheduled penetration tests, for example. So when you install a Hector or when you buy the license for the organization, you can so many IPs if you wish and run the Hector scan so many times if you want. So when you, for example, when I add a new firewall in my network, I start a scan before the firewall is inside and then after the firewall is installed. And then I see the deltas between the reports. So the second part is the defense part, and for this we need the intrusion detection. So the intrusion detection runs directly on the host, but first I will show you directly in the penetration testing part how we can configure a test. So first we need an Hector. I install on the Debian machine the Hector. I go to add Hector, run the curl command on the Debian machine, or I can run the Hector in a Docker environment. It's also possible. Then the Hector is installed. For my use case, it was very easy. I can use default settings, but we have different settings here. So first, the concurrent mode. This is this value. That means how many IPs or how many IPs we scan at the same time. Automatically mode means we use, for example, the Hector has 4 CPUs, and then we scan 4 IPs at the same time. Manually, we can change the number, for example, 200. Then we will scan 200 IP at the same times. But when you have a firewall between the networks, so for example, we scan, we have installed the Hector in the server network, and you have also a DMZ network or something else, separate network for your applications and so on. And we run the scan directly from the server from the Hector and server network. You have a firewall between it, or between the networks, and then it's very important that you change the frequency, because when we run, for example, with a high frequency, we have short scan delays. For example, the TCP connection will wait only 5 milliseconds, and then we have some security feature on the firewall. They will block the connection, like TCP sync flood detection, or the IDS on the firewall, and so on. So in this case, please change the frequency to low. This is the perfect way. And then you can only, per Hector, we can configure the port range. This is the default. I change it for an above scan to the whole range. So then I create some target groups. Or I create one target group, for example, only with one IP. But I can use also the watchdog information from the inventory part. I can add a network here, for example, 42.0/. Or I can add host names and so on. After this, I create an audit definition. The audit definition means which Hector, the source, which targets, the destination we will scan, which scans or which tests. For example, we can add some special out providers like LDAP user credentials or SSH user credential keys and so on. We can change the scan to a schedule scan, or we can skip some features. But the advanced settings means we have sometimes we have problems with the scan. For example, when we run a brute force and we configured our Active Directory that we lock the user after 2 failed logins, maybe some users will log with Hector, or in Germany we need this checks also, but you in the international part not, or the certification validation task is sometimes difficult because the customer has his own PKI or own certificate, and we must put the root certificate to the Hector. So when we start the scan, I start 3 scans. First, the normal. First, the scan with only with a fresh installed Windows 10 and no updates. I enabled RDP, remote desktop, for example, and then I see, oh, we checked, we run so many tests. We have 12 findings, and the risk score is over 200, for example. This is the first, over 200 is not high. I have some customers with hosts that has a risk score for one host only over 10,000. You can add comments. I have add also my comments here, and you see at the bottom, for example, with a scatter plot or with a table, the targets with the highest risk. When I have many targets here, I go to the summary and check which target has the highest risk, how many clients, or how many targets we have in this risk score, and so on. But now I must check, for example, in the target view, I can check directly the issues on the client. You see a lot of information, but I know the suite attack and also DA ITER attack are possible because remote desktop enabled by default these both ciphers, encryption, TLS version 1 and 1.1. And when I disabled it, I will remove this, and so on. So we see directly what is going on, and we can add some more information. For example, I run this check with brute forcing, and I see my password is not really good. The attack was possible. But what is with the defense part? I've enabled the defense part by this scan, and I see I have only one low event here, and this low event say, yes, remote desktop is open. Okay, this is it. Now what to enable the defense part, it's very easy for me because I create a policy, and the policy means IPS, or the intrusion prevention system, is enabled when I add this tag, for example. Now it's look a little bit strange because at the moment we recreate the front end and the new host view is under the beta functionality. I enabled this, that you see it look a little bit better now with tags. So I enabled IPS hard tag only. And then what is going on here? In the network analysis, we see in the first scan, I have enabled IDS only. I see a port scan, I see a TCP sync flood issue. We can check details, for example, but in the next scans, I blocked directly the TCP port scan, and then I blocked everything else behind this. So this was very easy, and for this, I create only the policy with the tag, and this was. So the next use case that we have is the PIM, the file integrity monitoring. The file integrity monitoring means we can check folder, files, and so on. That's very easy. We give you some managed rules for the default important files like winlogon.exe and so on, but you can create your custom rules also. I create in this screenshot 2 rules. One was last year in the October, the hacker group No Name was very active, and I create a rule that I track the encryption extensions and use it when the extension, when we see one of these extensions, I create an alert that with a plug-in behind it to isolate the client, for example. That is possible. And we have so many options for this. For me, also a very important rule is my certificate folder. Yes, I know, on the root folder. The root folder is not a work folder. Yes. But I create directly with step my certificates for the networks, because I use a Radius server to authorize the clients in the network via switch or access points. So I must create every time for new clients and certificate. And I see now with the alert when something is changed in the folder, when somebody has changed my certificate information or something else. So it's perfect for me. It's I know that the data integrity is correct. So how it works in the platform, it's very easy. We must enable the thin function in the policy, for example. So I create, let's check out some color check, do this. He create a policy rule with file integrity monitoring, and he tag it for all hosts. So every agent has enabled the file integrity monitoring. And then you must check the rules. These are the managed rules, for example, for Linux, for Windows, but you can add also some custom, and you can change it. For example, the important folder when we will track all changes in the imported folder, or who has read the files and so on, we can change the rule. Easy. And then we will create an alert for this. And the alerts are one of the most important feature of Enginsight, because we can create so many alerts. For example, for all Windows hosts in this organization, we need the file integrity alert, but only between some, only in non-business hours, for example, when you will track the finance and information, for example, then you can change the start from and do information and so on. But we have a lot of other default alerts. For example, when we read the system events, we can generate an alert that a new admin account was created on the Windows clients, for example, or if a user get more privilege, failed logins, and so on. A lot of alerts. The list is long, but we have some default alerts like the CVSS score, or we found a new CVSS vulnerability. The CVS score is greater than 9, for example. Yes. So the alert function is perfect. And the last use case, so I will go back to the slides. The last use case are the endpoints. Endpoint means website, URLs, IP address. Every service that will display a web page. For this, we need the sensor observer. The observer can handle some certificate information, the availability of the web page, DNS validation, HTTP headers, and so on. A lot of functions, but you can see it better in the front end. When we click to endpoints, for example, I will delete my Steffen Umland domain. I will add it. For example, we must choose, as we must add the target. We can add a description. We can change the text, and we must add a region. I will explain later what region means. I will start first the scan because the scan needs around 2 minutes. So I start the scan. I think slider finished. So I click to observer. It's the same as Hector and Watchdog. When you click on add observer, you get an curl command. And when you have install an observer, you have different options to configure it. First, you can add an alias. For example, Frankfurt or NGS Frankfurt. Then you will add a region. A region means more, it is a tag that will display. We have installed the Linux server in a data center in Frankfurt. So we add manually the region Frankfurt and add it to the things. Also, you can give your customers a shared observer. So you install it on your organization. And when you remove this option, so this is a perfect example, then you have a shared observer. And each organization on the instance can see the observer. But it's important when you have disabled the option that you have checked this option is also disabled, because internal targets is not a good idea to monitor, because the customers see the internal IP address, and when it's enabled here, I can check if the website here in the network, for example. So now my website is ready, and we see the risk score is not high. We see from all other websites the risk score here, and we see the certificate information. And these information are important in the future, because when somebody reads the news today or yesterday, they see Apple won't change the default expired period. At the moment, we have 1 year. They will increase the value to 48 days. Yes, in the next 5 years. So you must check it directly. And for this, we have a perfect alert. And you see what vulnerabilities are on the website, or which application are installed, and which application need an update or is an end of life status. And we checked every link on the website. So then we and also the reputation of the link. So for example, on my website is a link to GitHub, and GitHub is evil for us because some evil repos are on GitHub. So this is a blacklisted domain on my side, but I have no malware on my website. So when you check it, you can see directly, oh yes, it's GitHub, it's PoxFold, say it's evil. But you see a lot of more information, like which application is installed. So I see I must update the Nginx when I install the agent on the web server. I can update it directly over the platform, for example. And we checked also the DNS settings. We checked if it correct CAA record or correct SPF record. So you see everything. But you must configure some alerts, for example. In the past, in the future, it's very important with endpoints. any endpoint, I can configure greater than or smaller than 12 days, for example, for every. That is an easy alert. But when you have installed on the web server the agent, for example, you can add an automation part. For example, this is our web server. And on the web server, we run a script update certificates, for example. We don't have the script here, but it's possible. Yes. And we have a lot of other alerts here. Invalid CIA record, new vulnerability found. Yeah. Yes. And a lot of other things. So this was my last use case. There
was a question that was appearing a bit already. Are there reporting capabilities in the platform? Understanding that we have 4 minutes left.
Okay. Yes, you can. I forgot 2 things, Thomas. Sorry. Yes, you can generate to every time a report. For example, for the Hector, you can create here a report. You can choose the format. For example, I create now a PDF report. And then let's check my downloads. You see directly a perfect report here with customized information. Here's our logo. Here's our address, for example. And then we have some information here and the definitions. After this comes the management summary, for example. And then the important part, the technical summary, technical findings. So this is the first report, but sometimes you don't need a report. So for example, I have this audit here, and I want to check what is the difference between these both audits. And then you go to Delta, click to chat here, reference audit, and then you see, the Delta was, I found now a user with my very secure password. Yes.
Okay. All right, then I understand that was from the Q&As that I see here. That was kind of the question that still has been in the loop. So maybe let's just wrap up here. We have that is kind of the exit slide, and if you like to check and test the system, we have an own test and demo environment. A link is provided. Do sign up and go in and test all features and functions provided in there, understanding that that's a vendor-hosted SaaS version which resides in Frankfurt. If you say, I want to install that by myself somewhere in my environment, do us a favor, check on the documentation. There's also a part in there, but do understand you will need to have a Docker component from us. So we do contact us before going into that process. The CVE database that I talked about before, that is publicly available. Go in, check cve.enginsight.com. And if you have more questions, ask Stefan or myself via mentioned email address. I think with that, it's 11:59. We are in time, as said. We will follow up next week with a short email link to the video and with the slides. So not seeing any questions anymore. Enjoy the Easter days, and hopefully we talk to you soon.
Bye.
Goodbye.